Yeah. So what a cool weekend across all of our campuses. Welcome to Bethlehem Church. We're glad you're here. In all of our locations, we're one house with many rooms. Oconee, got to meet some folks there yesterday at a basketball game. It's good to be with you guys. 211 with Pastor Matt. Good to see you guys here at 316 with me in the north and in the south venue. It is week 2 of a series called Finding Your Way Back to God. And boy, I'm ready to go. But before we get going, I want you to look at the person right or your left, and I want you to say one of 3 things. I believe either the 49ers are going to win tonight, the Chiefs are going to win tonight, or I could care less. I'm just going to eat. Do it right quick. Tell the people you came with. That's right. If you got your Bibles, John chapter 1, we're going right to it. And I'm going to tell you, this is a week you're going to want to be tuned in. I'm going to hit a lot fast, but I think when you leave today, you're going to be changed. I know when you leave today, some of you are going to have a different level of confidence in your faith than you've ever had before. The Gospel of John, the first chapter, verse 1 says this: "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning. All things were made through him," and this is so big, "and without him was not anything made that was made." John gives us his recorded account of Jesus' life, and he skips the manger. He skips the baby scene, and he takes Jesus all the way back to the creation. He roots Jesus' existence in the creation. Creation is the foundational doctrine, Oconee 211, of the Christian faith. Virtually every other aspect of our theology rests upon our understanding of God as the origin and source of life, and the role Jesus Christ, who John said was the Word, plays in creation. Now, John could not have been any more clearly about how all things began, where all things came from, and Jesus' role in it than when he said this in verse 3. I mean, this is pretty clear. John, Jesus' best friend. I'm not talking about the baby in the manger. Here's what he says. All things. What things? All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Only God who created all things can redeem all things, church. Listen to me. Creation is the foundation stone of the gospel. Genesis 1, if it doesn't sound familiar, John 1, here's what Genesis 1 said. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Right there. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the faces of the water. That God was at the beginning of creation is not news for anybody that comes to church going, man, I didn't know we'd ever hear that at church. Right? That God is the source of all things is not going, boy, I didn't expect to hear that from the church. But here's where I want to press this morning. Do we just believe all that by blind faith? Where does that come from, right? In our culture, it's fine to have personal faith, but just don't bring your personal faith into the public sphere. Come on. It's okay if it helps you to have personal faith. That's okay. If you need it as a crutch, good for you. It's all good. But here's the idea. Faith and reason, faith and logic, faith and higher education really don't go together. So if you're a person of faith, that's cool. It works for you. But there's really no place for it in the real world. You with me? See, we're in week 2 of a series we're calling Finding Your Way Back to God. And it's all based on questions Christians and non-Christians alike have about the Christian faith. For non-Christians, many of them have sincere questions. For Christians, many of them have questions but don't feel like they can ask it. And we're in week 2 of this series. And let me recap week 1 by saying this. I heard a story of a young lady who was drawing a picture at school. And her teacher came over and asked, well, what are you drawing? She says, I'm drawing a picture of God. Her teacher looked back at her and said, well, honey, you know nobody really knows what God looks like it. And the little girl looked back and go, well, they're going to know when I get through, right? What we said last week was simply this. All of us have a picture of God in our minds. All of us have a picture of God of what we think God is like. Many of it's based on past experiences. Many of it's based on sound bits and tidbits. Many of it's based on maybe being raised in the South. And here's what we said. This is not in your notes, but this is just kind of a summary of last week. Most people who reject the idea of God don't reject the possibility of existence. They reject what they think they know about Him. They don't reject the possibility of existence. They reject the ideas that they think they know about Him. All we're saying is the God in your mind, the God of cultural Christianity, or the God of the Christian faith? There's the picture we have in our mind. At Bethlehem Church, we want you to have an informed faith, not an assumed faith. I've pastored in the South for 20 years. The majority, I shouldn't say the majority, a vast amount of people would not admit it, but in the South they have an assumed faith. An assumed faith means, well, I just raised like that. I'm just, it's what my grandpapa and my daddy and mama, and there's never been a personal holding on to that faith that's just kind of passed on to them. That's called an assumed faith. And here's what an assumed faith does, if you're taking notes. An assumed faith lacks clarity, has very little conviction, and has no courage. A person who has an assumed faith is 3 hard questions away from having their worldview shattered. I want you to hear that, Oconee 2:11. If you're watching online, the person that's just kind of got a faith that works because they live in the South, it's just the way they were raised, but it's never been personal to them, they are 3 hard questions away from having their worldview shattered. An informed faith, though, is what we're talking about this series, has clarity, lives with conviction, and stands with courage. One, it has clarity, lives with conviction, and stands with courage. One of the foundational problems our culture has posed over the last 200 years when it comes to faith is what I call the problem of science and reason. That science, reason, logic, and faith don't go together. John Dickerson, who wrote the book Jesus Skeptic, that's in the resource sheet, that's a resource for you to go deeper into the series that I'm talking about. There's a bunch of books. He wrote one of them. He was a journalist before he went into the ministry. He won the David Broder Award from Tom Brokaw. Okay, this guy was a legit journalist. Now he's a pastor. He said he learned a truth in journalism that applies to faith. And this isn't in your notes, but this is so big. It's where I'm going this morning. Here's what he says. Whenever there's a powerful story, there are powerful people who want to suppress the truth. And here's how you suppress the truth. By distorting and twisting and manipulating what is true and what is real. It's not an outright rejection, but it's a manipulation. Now, on YouTube, I saw a clip, and they had taken Mary Poppins, the most family-friendly, kind movie, and they had basically taken clips from it, kind of joking around, and turned it into a horror movie, and for 2 minutes was a trailer called Scary Mary, okay? And they put some really scary music and some really stuff, and they twisted the whole way the story was. Now, what if what our culture's done over the last 200 years has done that when it comes to science and logic and faith? We twisted it and manipulated it. Think about the caricatures that we see on clips, on news broadcasts. You can find it on YouTube. In this corner, you got Dr. So-and-so, and he's got 3 PhDs from Cambridge in molecular biology. He lectures at Oxford, and he's written 2 New York Times bestsellers, and he's going to argue for science. And on this side, you got Joe. And Joe's going to argue for faith. He homeschools his kids, or maybe Christian schools his kids, right? He believes Oprah's the Antichrist. And he lives in a swamp. But that's the caricature of our culture, right? There's smart, and then there's faith. There's brains, and then there's faith. Write this down, church. We're going to have some fun. The Christian has nothing to fear from science because the God of the Bible is the God of creation. Write that down, 211 Oconee. We're about to hit it right quick. The Christian's got nothing to fear, no matter the manipulation, the distortions that we've done, because the God of the Bible is the God of creation. What are you saying, preacher? Here's what I want you to see. I'll put this in your notes, then I'll let you listen. All true scientific discoveries simply illuminate the world God's made. All true scientific discoveries, all it does is illuminate the world God has made. What if the world of faith and reason are not opposed to each other, but actually belong together in beautiful, life-giving symmetry? Now, let's recall middle school science for a second. How many of you dudes in the room, I know you, slept through middle school science? Raise your hand, right? You don't remember, okay? Well, let me get you caught up. The scientific revolution you learned about in middle school science, it was a unique time in human history when the mysteries of the world were unlocked by a relatively small group of people in one part of the world in a very succinct period of time. It's the scientific revolution. It took place, the interesting thing is, during a time of spiritual revival, during a time of intense Christian belief known as the Protestant Reformation. Now, the Protestant Reformation was a time when Christians were beginning to read and apply the Bible and what we call the priesthood of the believer, read and apply the Bible for themselves rather than merely trusting the words of priests who at that time had become political puppets for the formal church. The Protestant Reformation is when sincere Jesus followers attempted to bring the faith back to a pure expression of what Jesus meant and cleanse the church of corruption, evil, and politics. That's known as the Protestant Reformation. This is in your notes, so let me give you what I'm trying to say here. The Protestant Reformation historically happened between 1517 to 1648. Historically. Here's the interesting thing. The scientific revolution followed right on its heels between 1543 and 1687. Why do you say that? As an explosion of personal faith began, people began reading the scripture for themselves, knowing what it meant to walk with God. Out of this spawned the greatest advancement in science the world has ever known. Let me give you some examples. Isaac Newton. If you went to middle school science, you remember he's the guy, the apple guy. You know what I mean? The apple falls on his head and it's like, man, right? And that's where you get it from. He was the guy that came up with the idea of gravity. He is the guy who defined the laws of motion. Albert Einstein would say, there is no modern science without Isaac Newton. The father of modern science. Gravity, laws of motion defined by Isaac Newton. Let me give you words that he wrote. The most beautiful system of the sun, planets and comets, could only proceed from and dominion of an intelligent, powerful being. This being governs all things, not as the soul of the world, but as the Lord over all. And on account of his dominion, he is wont to be called Lord God. Isaac Newton was not an accidental Christian. His entire way of seeing the world was Jesus as the creator and through the lens of Jesus as God. It has been estimated that Isaac Newton wrote more than 4 million words of theology. 3 quotes from his personal journal, the father of modern science. Here's 3 quotes. This is from Isaac Newton's personal journal. This is life, eternal, that they might know the only true God and Jesus Christ whom thou hast sent. The father of modern science. We are in him. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. We are in him. That is true, even in his son, Jesus Christ. This is the true God. Now, here's another one. Blaise Pascal. He was a mathematician, he was a physicist, and he was an inventor. In fact, the modern computer goes back to, most people give him the first person. He made this kind of personal calculator, right? Talk about personal calculator, right? In the time of the scientific revolution, this is what many people would say was the first attempt at a modern computer. Blaise Pascal, father of the scientific revolution, the boom that science as we know it is what comes from this time. When he passed away, Blaise Pascal had a written poem that he authored in his coat pocket. Not that was put in his coat pocket when he was put in the grave, but when he passed away, this was in his coat pocket, a written poem that he had written, and here's what it says. God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not of the philosophers and of the learned, God of Jesus Christ, my God and your God. Forgetfulness of the world and everything except God. He is the only found by the ways taught in the gospel. Grandeur of the human soul. This is so good. Righteous Father, the world has not known you, but I have known you. Now, let's even get more confident. Sociologist Rodney Stark explored the journals and artifacts of the 52 most influential scientists in the scientific revolution. This list was picked out by a secular group of the most influential scientists in the scientific revolution. He studied 52 of their personal artifacts, their journal entries, and their writings. Here's what he found. Sociologist Rodney Stark. 98% of the founders of the scientific revolution were committed Christians. This narrative that you have, that our culture plays out, that you got to have faith, you got to lay down your brains, is unfounded. Unless a person wants to claim to be smarter than Isaac Newton and Blaise Pascal, they need to stop suggesting that faith in Jesus is anti-intellectual. That somehow faith in Jesus is anti-intellectual. See, what if it's not science versus faith? What if it's science and faith? What if science can tell you the how, but faith gets to the why? See, I hear you, Jason. Okay, awesome. That's a couple hundred years back, though, man. I mean, I'm talking about we're even past where those guys are as far as science. You're right. So according to the American Association for the Advancements of Science poll done in 2009, a poll of scientists done on scientists, 51% of their own community believe in some sort of deity, higher power, believe in a God, 51%. Of that 51%, half of them believe in a personal God. The other 49% who don't believe, the majority of them are not atheists, they're agnostic, which means they're just not sure. All I'm saying is this, church. Do not let a broken world tell you that you have to lay down your faith, right? Lay down your brains to pick up faith. Our faith is not baseless, my friends. Our faith has a basis. Our faith is not baseless. Our faith has a base is. Francis Collin, who's arguably the most brilliant man alive today. He is the founder. He is the guy who come up with the Human Genome Project. You can Google it when you get home. Mapping the way our genetic framework works. Francis Collins. Here's what he says. Science is powerless to answer questions such as why did the universe come into being? What is the meaning of human existence and what happens after we die? See, the Christian faith teaches three elementary, basic, but central things about the God of the Christian faith. And I want you to put them down. That God is moral. It's what we believe, that the God of Scriptures, the God is moral. What does that mean? That He has a viewpoint of life, He has a viewpoint of your life in the direction it should go. That God is moral. That's what that means. Leave that back up for a second. Leave it back up for a second. I know I'm moving quick here. God's got a viewpoint of life, your life in the direction it should go. God is personal. What does that mean? That God wants to be known and is personal. 211 Oconee, Bethlehem Church, that God wants to be known and is personal. Here's what that means, that He's not completely and utterly transcendent and completely removed. The Bible teaches that God is not some sort of transcendent being that set everything up and kind of just rotates the world on His finger like a Harlem Globetrotter would spin a basketball. It's not the way it works. It's not what the Christian faith teaches. That God is personal. Here's the third thing, that God is relational. That He wants to have a relationship with us. And in our brokenness, and in our sin, in our disobedience, in our rebellion, He makes a way through Jesus. So let me give you two quick arguments. When somebody, I just can't believe there's a God. Or when you struggle and go, dude, I just see all in the world and how it works. And when you find yourself in a place, let me give you two quick things to think about. To get up under the argument of the existence of God. It's not new that truthfully the scientific revolution sprung from what we know as the Protestant Reformation, which was a time of intense revival and spiritual renewal. The church came back to purity, and followed in that was the scientific revolution. Let me give you a couple thoughts. Just some confidence builders. I could spend all day on these two things, but I'm not, right? I may at the 5 o'clock service, but not this one, okay? They don't got anywhere to be. Who cares about the Super Bowl? Now here, listen. Here's what I want to say. If there is no moral force behind the universe, then why are we moral creatures? It's what's referred to as the moral argument. This single argument is why C.S. Lewis, who was an atheist, came to faith in Christ. Probably the most prolific author of the Christian faith there's ever been. He was an atheist. And this single argument is what he could not get his head around to when it came to the existence and the reality of God. Here's the thinking behind the argument, right? I'm giving you a lot. You're going to have to go back. You're going to dude, I got to go back and watch that again. You need to. Because your confidence, I hope, is building in this room for a second, right? The thinking behind the moral argument is this intuitively. Each of us, all of us, appeals to some sort of right and wrong in our design with ourselves, with others, and with the world around us. Let me give you an example. Somebody cuts in front of the line, and you go, hey man, no cutting. Well, here's what you're doing. You're appealing to some sort of behavioral standard that you think they know. That you're supposing they know are in the same loops. C.S. Lewis noted that when you trace the moral teachings throughout all of human history, they're remarkably the same. Moral teaching, morality. All of human history, they're arguably very close to the same. What do you mean? Egyptians, Babylonians, Hindus, Greeks, Chinese. I know it's crazy, but American 2020 is not all that the world's ever been. Nuts, I know. Right? Egyptians, Babylonians, Hindus, Chinese, Greeks, and Romans. It's amazing how alike they are each other morally. What do you mean? For example, in any culture, selfishness has never been admired and loyalty has always been praised. In any culture, you look in human history, selfishness has never been admired. Not saying people haven't been selfish, but it's not been, man, look at that. That's what we all need to be. No. And loyalty's always been praised. Lewis notes that cultures may differ on whether you can have one wife or four wives through human history, but they've always agreed that you simply can't have any woman you want. Here's the question Lewis raises when it comes to the moral argument. If there is no creator, then why are we all moral beings? Why do we agree to some type of moral standard? And this is not in your notes, but this is so good. A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. See, church, if we just evolved from animals and from apes, then why do we have this sense of morality? Where does it come from? Did we just stumble upon it? Did we just come up with it? No. Not everybody agrees with Christian morality. I'm not going to make that argument. But everyone has a sense of morality. There's never been a culture in human history that said, hey man, murder, it's all good. It's just naturalistic evolution. It's all good. Never in human history. Never been a culture in human history that says rape, it's okay. No big deal. And when you get up under that natural sense of morality that seems to course within every person, there can be no other answer besides the source of this innate morality except it was placed there by God. Genesis 1:27, we were created in the image of God. Let me keep moving for a second. You can get real crazy. The second argument, if there's no moral force behind the universe, why is it that the universe, humanity has been governed by a sense of morality since the beginning of time? Where does that come from? I grew up on a farm. Those animals that we have did not have the same sense of morality that humans do. All right? Where does that come from? Where does that sense come from? Here's the second one. Let me really mess with you for a second. Atheists and theists have both agreed for centuries. Atheists and theists have both agreed for centuries. This is not hard to think about here. Simply this, the cosmological argument. Anything that exists has to have a cause. Anything that exists has to have a cause. So what referred to in higher planes of thinking is the cosmological argument. And here's the cosmological argument. Here it is, real simple. Look at the world. Look at everything that exists for the thousands of years that it exists and ask this one simple question. How did it happen? How did it happen? Think about it. You know this. Everything that exists has to have a cause. Now, I'm smiling here for a second. Parents, you know this. You didn't come home one day from shopping with your spouse and there were kids in your house and you're like, well, hey, honey, we got kids now. Came home from shopping, her idea, and there's two kids. Hey, honey, we got kids. No. You know what happened. Romantic night out. Dinner out, one thing leads to the next. 9 months later, you got a kid. Right? You really want to mess with it. It's the same way you came into existence, right? You're parents, but that's a whole other thing there, okay? It's a lot of counseling for some of you. Now listen. Well, Jason, that's science. Big Bang Theory. Now, that's pretty scientific, right? Before the last 100 years, Edwin Hubble's the one that kind of argued the Big Bang Theory, which was simply this, that there was suddenly a bang and everything was here. For years, Carl Sagan, who was a famed atheist, the argument was that the universe is all that there ever was and there ever will be. The universe somehow has just always been. A little more than 100 years ago, Edwin Hubble comes along, says, no, there was this beginning. There was a beginning. There was this big bang that happened. Bunch of gases, mixture. I'm making it real simple. But here's the problem with that idea for a second, right? If there's just a big bang, the idea that there was a lot of nothing, and then there was just miraculously something. Here's the math. You take God out of the equation at the beginning. That's all I want you to do. How did it all get here? Where do we get this sense of morality that's just wired in us? Because evolution, right? Animals, again, I grew up on a farm. They weren't governed by the same sense of morality humans are. Right? I can give you a description, but it gets real uncomfortable when I do that. Right? Okay? Not governed by the same sense of morality humanity is. But if there was nothing at the beginning, then here's the scientific equation to the Big Bang. Take away God. Here it is. Nobody times nothing equals everything. Now you tell me what takes greater faith. You tell me what's laying down logic and reasoning. If there was nobody and there was nothing, but bam, there was everything. If the universe could not have come into existence by itself from nothingness, you know that, because nothingness cannot produce anything. That matter had to come from somewhere. And if the universe isn't eternal, there wasn't a creation, there really was a creation of it through some kind of big bang. Here's the questions you have to ask. What made it bang? And how did the matter get there that was in the bang? Which brings us back all the way to the beauty that's not only in science, but's demanded by science. That there was a creator. There was the beginning. And as John said, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God. And the Word was God. As John said it, all things were made through Him. And without Him, not anything was made that is. Why do you say all this? Listen to me. I need everybody across all of our campuses. Your belief system, if you are a follower of Jesus, I need you to hear me, is real. I've given you a nutshell in 25 minutes. A nutshell. Do not buy into this whole idea. Well, if you got faith, that's fine. But you got to lay down your brains and you got to lay down your logic and you got to lay down your reasoning. I would argue, no, you pick them up. Because the Christian faith is not just, oh, that just happened one time somewhere and we just kind of believe it. Church, wake up. Here's what I'm saying to you. There is a real God who really knows you and really wants you to know Him. Does that sound redundant? I'm going to say it again because those are my words I chose real carefully. There is a real God. And that real God, Oconee campus, 211 campus, He really knows you. And that really God who really knows you really wants you to know Him, church. Well, I believe that. Here's my question. Are you confident of that? Does that confidence inform your convictions? Oh, I believe in God, but this is the life I'm choosing. That's not confidence. Does that confidence give you courage? What are you saying? Listen to me. A real God who really knows you, here's what that means. He knows your sin. He knows your shame. He knows your hypocrisy. He knows your lying tongue. He knows your pain. He knows your hurt. There's a really God who really knows you. He knows your dark secrets. He knows what you don't think anybody else knows. He knows what you promised you would never do again, and you keep doing it. He knows your hypocrisy. He knows your hurt. He knows your pain. He knows your struggle. He knows your doubt. There's a real God who really knows you, and here's the crazy thing, and He gives us Jesus because He wants us to really know Him. That's the gospel. It's the center of our belief that there's a God at the beginning. That this whole thing is not some kind of hocus pocus, Santa Claus in the sky, everybody be nice. And he's watching us from afar. Wake up, church. There's a confidence in what we have. There's conviction that comes from that confidence. Oh, listen, that's why there's Jesus. Because there's a real God who really knows you and wants you to really know him. Now, we've been reminded the last 7 days about the frailty, the fragility, the brevity of life. Because this past Sunday, like all of you, your phones notified you the NBA great Kobe Bryant and his daughter were tragically killed with 9 other people in a helicopter. Everybody got the news. Sunday afternoon, I was laying down before I came back up and preached at 5, and the news obviously was everywhere. And things like that happen. You pray for his family, it breaks your heart, and all that goes with that. But here's what you've watched us as a culture. If you've been watching from afar, and I've prayed for his family, my wife and I've talked about it, my kids talked about it, because again, it's a public figure, everyone knew. One of the greatest players in NBA history with his daughter. And here's the thing that you've watched our culture wrestle with the last 7 days, is no matter the amount of money, no matter the fame, there's a brevity of life that we can't control. Nobody in this room either. You know that. Like, here's the thing that as a pastor, I smile and just sometimes shake my head. Every person in this room is 100% convinced that they're guaranteed 70, 80, or 90 years. You're not. But we all live like we're just guaranteed that. That's what I find as a pastor, is that people just live life like, 70, 80, 90 years, you're kind of guaranteed that somewhere in this. And then we are brought back and you're reminded through the painful loss of what we saw, how quick life is. Let me tell you what I've learned, the difference between an assumed faith. Go all the way back to the beginning. An assumed faith is a faith that really doesn't have any clarity in what they believe. There's really no conviction, and they don't have much courage. They're just kind of a Christian because they picked it up along the way. They're just kind of a Christian because they vote Republican. They're just kind of a Christian because they've been living in the South. It's an assumed faith. There's no conviction. There's no clarity. There's no confidence. When pain hits, when tragedy hits, let me differentiate between an assumed faith and an informed faith. An assumed faith, when tragedy and pain hits, and here's what I want to tell you, this is not me being prophetic, pain and tragedy will hit your life. It's going to hit. Hard times, difficulty. Here's what I found. Somebody with an assumed faith, they have this, oh God, why is this happening? Oh God, this isn't fair. Oh God, why are you punishing me? Oh God, you're a phony. Oh God, if you love me so much, then why would... And people who have this kind of fluffy faith that there's not really conviction, there's not really confidence, they just kind of picked it up. When life gets hard, here's what you get. Oh God, what did I do? It's amazing. We're saved by grace, but we can believe we live by karma. Oh God, you're a phony because we had a deal under the table that if I did this, then you would do this, and you're not holding up on your end of the deal. They have an oh God, and an oh God is full of fear. It's fear-stricken. It's a faith that's convenient. It's a faith that just comes because it's kind of the cultural whims of the time. But when somebody has an informed faith, what do you mean informed faith? They've got clarity in what they believe. That belief has given them conviction. And they stand encouraged because they know when pain and when tragedy and when hurt hits, and listen to me from the front to the back, 211 Oconee, it will hit. When it hits, they have a whole different mentality. Theirs is okay, God. Okay, God, I didn't ask for this. And this hurts, but I know you're with me. And I know you're real. And I know you're at the beginning, and I know you'll be at the end. Okay, God, I don't know how this works, and I'm not crazy about this, but I know your purposes can even be come through in this. I know your purposes even will come through in this. Okay, God, this is a mess. And I'm not sure the way forward, but I'm clinging to you because I'm convinced you're real. And I'm convinced I'm a mist that appears and is gone tomorrow. And I'm convinced that you are real, that you are with me, that you want to know me and listen to me. And yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I don't have to stay there because you're with me. That's different faith. It's two different faiths. Oh, God, what? Not fair. No. How? Okay, God. Not what I asked for. Not what I was planning on. But I know you're with me. And I know this world's broken. And I know this world's not my home. And I know that I'm walking with you in the season. Here's my question. Oconee Campus, 211, watching online, Bethlehem Church. Which are you? When it comes to your faith, you have confidence that there's a real God that really knows you and wants you to really know him.